has a different trauma healing journey, right? Everybody's experiences with trauma are unique and different. And so the journey, of course, the healing is gonna look unique. That being said, I've been in this field long enough to recognize that there's one pattern that most people go through, and it's kind of the big picture pattern that I've noticed most of my clients, most of the people that I've worked with, they go through this same pattern. And I think knowing this pattern at the beginning of your journey can be really helpful so that you know what's coming and you know what to anticipate. So let's take some time to go through what I call the trauma healing journey. And we're just going to talk about the different points that you might expect or experience on your journey. So we start in this spot, and we're going to call that the problem spot or the traumatized spot. This is where you know that things are not right, but you haven't necessarily done things to change that yet. You're just able to say, life isn't great, and I've experienced trauma, and I think some of these things are interconnected. Life's not great. That's where we are now. Then we start to do something. Now, when I say something, that's such a broad word because for a lot of folks, that's therapy. But therapy is not the only way to heal trauma. For some folks, it's doing self-help books. For some folks, it's yoga. For some people, it's doing different retreats on their own. Many different things. But what happens is things start to go up. And we call this stage the early, if you know what I mean, success. So at this point, we start doing something and things feel better. So if you're going to counseling, maybe it's that you start getting tools and techniques from your therapist that make you regulate a little bit. You just feel a little bit more grounded, a little bit better. Or maybe you start doing yoga and you start to notice that when I'm on the mat, I just don't feel as bad. And that feeling lasts and stretches. So it's not only in the moment that you're feeling better, but in general, you start to notice, I'm feeling better, things are okay. For some people in this stage, they talk about it as the connecting of the dots. So things start to make sense, where they've always wondered, why am I this way? And why do I respond like that? The early success for some folks might be that they're starting to notice, this is how this connects to that. And they feel better because things don't feel as confusing or overwhelming anymore. After the early success, things start to get hard again. That's usually what we see. And we call this the setback stage. It's the reality of trauma therapy, trauma work, trauma healing, is that things do take a bit of a dip again. This tends to be the stage when we've done the easy part of the healing. We've done the first bits that make us feel better, our symptoms are reduced a little bit, we feel a bit better, and then we start to realize that this next bit is going to be hard. In trauma therapy, it tends to be the part when we realize the next step is that we have to move more into the trauma. We have to start actually moving towards it to feel better. So we actually start to dive, and that drop, it continues. It continues all the way into what some people like to call the crisis stage. So in the crisis, this is when we're in the thick of the trauma again. So when you're in therapy, this might be when you're doing the actual processing, or this might be if you're out and about in the world, this might be when you're starting to really work through the hard parts of the trauma, right? You're starting to readdress it. You're starting to feel the pain from back then that you didn't have access to because you had to survive, and now you're feeling it. And it is so hard and so difficult. In this stage, I have a lot of folks who tell me that they wish that they hadn't started trauma therapy at all. They recognize that they're further along than they used to be, but this part is so hard that sometimes it's just like, I wish I was just back where I was before without the awareness. At least I was surviving, and right now things feel really difficult. Of course, I have good news for you. If we keep going, things are going to shift. When we stick it out, when we keep going through that crisis phase, we go into what is called recovery. In this recovery phase, things start to get better. They get so much better. We start to feel better because we're through the thick of it. We're through the roughest part of that trauma, and things start to feel a little bit easier again. Things start to flow. Our symptoms, they're reduced. They're not as strong as they once were. Life feels easier than it ever has. I often find that this is where therapy starts to come to a close. People are starting to feel a little bit better. Things are getting easier. Now, I really suggest staying with whatever your healing process is long enough to go through the recovery phase as much as you can. What sometimes happens is we stop when we're about here, for example. We stop on the recovery phase. But if we stick through it, we can actually go even higher than we previously were with our early successes. And we can feel better than we ever have before. This place, often referred to as the better place. And I don't mean the better place like that wonderful TV show with Kirsten, who's it with? It's not with Kurt. Anyways, you know the one I'm talking about, that wonderful TV show called The Better Place. It's not like that. It's not actually hell pretending to be good. This place is actually finally where you've resolved the traumas, you've moved through them, you feel better than you ever have before. So, what do you think? Here's kind of the cycle that I see most of my people go through. They start with a problem, they get some early successes, they have this setback, moves into this crisis of like really hard, really difficult to process these traumas. They're doing the hard emotional work. As they continue that work though, they come up through recovery and end at a better place.